CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to The World Today, live from CGTN in London. I'm Polly Middlehurst. Our top stories. The G7 backs a global infrastructure plan to challenge China's Belt and Road Initiative. Russia's leader says relations with the US are at their lowest in years, just days before the two presidents are due to meet. The UK government promises caution ahead of a decision on whether to lift remaining COVID restrictions in England later this month. And its mission accomplished on Mars. China's first visit to the Red Planet is declared a success. So G7 leaders then have agreed on a global infrastructure plan to rival China's multi-trillion-dollar Belt and Road Initiative, part of a wider push back against Beijing's growing international influence. It's day two of the summit in Cornwall in southwest England, where the group of seven has been meeting face-to-face for the first time in 2 years. Our correspondent Nawid Jabakil reports now from St Ives. Nawid, strategic competition with China has been high on today's agenda. What more can you tell us about this spending plan they've got?
That's right, Polly. The White House saying that this is essentially a transparent, is what they called it, alternative to China's Belt and Road Initiative. And what it's looking to do, according to President Biden, is help low and middle income countries plug a funding gap for infrastructure worth around $40 trillion by 2035. It's looking to engage not just the G7, who, as you say, have signed up to this, but also the private sector in the Western world. Four key areas they're looking to invest in these countries in. One, climate change. Two, health security, the pandemic obviously driving a lot of that thinking. The third one is digital technology, things like artificial intelligence and cybersecurity, again, a hot topic here of discussions for these leaders. And then fourthly is gender equity and equality. But I think the bigger overarching factor here is also geostrategic, because China has stolen a march when it comes to the US and other countries here at the G7 in investing in these countries. More than 100 projects around the world, countries around the world have signed deals with China for its Belt and Road Initiative, and that includes things like roads to other infrastructure like highways, railways, airports as well, all across large parts of the developing world. According to data provider Refinitiv, there are more than 2,600 projects spanning the BRI at the moment, with total investment worth almost $4 trillion. No comments specifically from China on what's happened here in the last few hours, but there was some word from the UK embassy, the Chinese embassy here in the UK, who said that global decisions, quote, were the days when global decisions were dictated by a small group of countries are long gone. I expect there will be more to come tomorrow, perhaps, once the foreign ministry in Beijing looks at this and assesses their response. But looking at the wider issue, I think this is about an understanding from President Biden that a lot of power, particularly economic power, is shifting from the traditional countries that make up the G7 and moving to the developing world, or the so-called South, places like Asia, places like Africa, and places like Latin America. And so much of the economic growth over the past 100 years has been represented by the countries that make up the G7, the leaders that are represented here, but that may not be the case moving forward. Polly.
And Nawid, Brexit has also been a key topic during sideline discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. Boris Johnson, before he got his day going here for the G7 summit, he first met with Emmanuel Macron, his French counterpart, and then Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, and then the European Union's representatives here, Ursula von der Leyen and Charles Michel. And no breakthrough there as far as Boris Johnson or the Europeans are concerned. Ursula von der Leyen tweeting a few hours ago saying that we want the best possible relations with the EU, with the UK, but both sides must implement what we agreed on. There is complete EU unity on this, and what she's referring to is the Northern Ireland Protocol, which was agreed between the two sides as part of Britain's exit from the EU towards the end of last year, its final end of that withdrawal agreement, and what it meant is that Northern Ireland essentially is treated differently to the rest of the UK. There are checks on goods going into that part of the UK, and it's led to some sectarian violence that has re-emerged in recent months, the sorts of violence that hasn't been seen for many, many years. So there is a real concern about this, and Boris Johnson, he spoke a few moments ago following those meetings and said for the UK this is a matter of sovereignty.
I think that we'll have some pragmatic solutions, and if we don't, then I think that what our friends have also understood is that it's the prime duty of the UK government to uphold the territorial integrity of the United Kingdom, and that's what we're going to do, and we'll do whatever it takes to ensure that.
And Noid, of course, G7 synonymous with protests, and climate has been at the forefront of this particular summit too.
Yeah, they have here in St Ives, where the leaders are meeting. The numbers have been much, much smaller, still in the hundreds, though, about an hour away in Falmouth in Cornwall, where lots of the world's media is staying. There have been thousands of people turning out. My colleague John Beaver has been looking at some of the innovative ways they've been trying to raise awareness about climate change.
They arrived by land and by sea. Hundreds descended on Falmouth's Gillingvays beach, all focused on one cause: climate change and the need to act. The concern is that leaders at the nearby G7 summit will make bold promises, but little will change.
Well, we need greater ambition, and we need practical plans and finance to make sure that the climate plans they have will be achieved. It's all well and good talking a good talk, but what we need is more than platitudes. We need action now.
My first grandchild, when I held him in my arms when he was about 2 weeks old, I thought, I want a better world for you. We've got to do something.
And it's not just public protesters calling for change. Prince Charles also used his time at the summit to urge leaders to put the climate first.
The fight against this terrible pandemic provides, if ever one was needed, a crystal clear example of the scale and sheer speed at which the global community can tackle crises when we combine political will with business ingenuity and public mobilization. Ladies and gentlemen, we are doing it for the pandemic, so if you don't mind me saying so, we must also do it for the planet.
Protests so far have been largely peaceful. Police here hoping it stays that way, despite emotions running high. A second protest just hours later showed the scale of people demanding meaningful change.
With economic recovery after the pandemic, vaccine inequality and global trade issues all being discussed, the fear is that climate change is seen as a long-term issue and little immediate action is taken. But protesters argue that it should be at the top of the agenda before it's too late. John Beaver, CGTN, Cornwall.
Now, Russia's relationship with the United States is at its lowest for years, according to Vladimir Putin. The Russian leader spoke to American broadcaster NBC ahead of next week's meeting with President Joe Biden in Geneva. He also described Biden's predecessor, Donald Trump, as talented and colourful, but impulsive, saying Biden was radically different.
We have a bilateral relationship that has deteriorated to its lowest point in recent years.
You once described President Trump as a bright person, talented. How would you describe President Biden?
Well, even now, I believe that former U.S. President, Mr. Trump, is an extraordinary individual, talented individual. Otherwise, he would not have become U.S. President. He's a colorful individual. You may like him or not. But he didn't come from the U.S. establishment. He had not been part of big-time politics before. And some like it, some don't like it. But that is a fact. President Biden, of course, is radically different from Trump because President Biden is a career man. He has spent virtually his entire adulthood in politics. Just think of the number of years he spent in the Senate. A different kind of person. And it is my great hope that, yes, there are some advantages, some disadvantages, but there will not be any impulse-based movements on behalf of the sitting U.S. president.
Late John McCain in Congress called you a killer. When President Trump was told that you are a killer, he didn't deny it. When President Biden was asked whether he believes you are a killer, he said, I do. Mr. President, are you a killer?
Over my tenure, I've gotten used to attacks from all kinds of angles and from all kinds of areas under all kinds of pretext and reasons, and of different caliber and fierceness, and none of it surprises me. So as far as harsh rhetoric, I think that this is an expression of overall U.S. culture. Of course, in Hollywood, there are some underlying deep things in Hollywood, macho, which can be treated as cinematic art, but that is part of U.S. political culture where it's considered normal. By the way, not here. It is not considered normal here.
Now, the question of whether or not England will end all coronavirus restrictions on the 21st of June is in doubt now, as cases of the so-called Delta variant continue to spread. Speaking on the sidelines of the G7 summit, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the government must now exercise caution over the final stage of its roadmap for lifting COVID restrictions. Well, CGTN's Guy Henderson is in London for us, gauging the mood, shall we say, Guy. But what has the Prime Minister been saying precisely?
So you remember back in February, the depths of lockdown here in England, and Prime Minister Boris Johnson threw a lifeline to people, essentially, gave them a bit of hope by saying we're going to lay out this gradual roadmap towards easing restrictions that we want to be an irreversible process. What you're seeing behind me here in central London, in sort of central west London, is stage 3 of that four-stage process. So cafes, pubs, restaurants are open. 6 people or 2 households are allowed to meet inside those premises. Up to 30 people are allowed to meet outdoors, so still not allowing the kind of big events, weddings, festivals, that kind of thing that you'd usually see through the summer months. And the 21st of June was penciled in by the government back in February as the date that you could see that final unlocking take place. But officials have always said that was going to depend on the data, and at the moment the data is showing a significant increase in number of coronavirus cases. At the latest count, more than 7,000 over the last 24-hour period for the 4th day running, and also a suggestion that hospitalisations are on the rise again as well. And so that has led to reporting over the weekend that perhaps the Prime Minister might be set to delay that final stage of unlocking by up to 4 weeks. Now, Boris Johnson is still down in Cornwall at the G7. He was asked about this issue, and this is what he had to say about it.
You've got to be cautious in order to deliver what we want to see, which is an irreversible roadmap. But we're looking at the data today. Again, you've got hospitalisations up, you've got cases up. There are grounds for caution. That doesn't mean that this country hasn't made enormous progress with vaccination. Clearly, what you've got is a race between the vaccines and the virus, and the vaccines are going to win. It's just a question of the pace.
Do you regret? So, Guy, how are people reacting to that news?
Well, it's been a long, long wait to what a lot of people across England and the UK have dubbed Freedom Day, the day when all legal restrictions for coronavirus will be removed. And perhaps inevitably there's a debate going on, including here along the banks of the River Thames, with those on the one hand who say, in the scheme of things, what's a few weeks extra delay? You know, what difference is that going to make? And on the other hand, people who have told us in the last few hours, enough is enough.
I wouldn't support it because I think the whole point of the vaccination programme was to protect kind of older and vulnerable people, and to me it looks like they've all been vaccinated anyway. So it's just kind of like, if we keep worrying about variants and we keep pushing it into the long grass, then where does it end? So I think now's the moment. Like, that was when we were promised 21st of June, and we should just stick to that.
I think people are making more out of it than they should. Out of the delays and everything. There's no grey area here. Either you stay healthy or you risk not staying healthy. Well, there is no alternative to that.
Well, 55.4% or so of the adult population of the UK have now been vaccinated fully. That is one of the most advanced vaccination programmes of any country in the world, and yet it does seem as though the threat, the risk, the danger has still not been entirely stamped out. So just bear in mind and think of those other countries, most of the rest of the world, many countries that are far behind the UK in terms of getting jabs into arms. They, of course, will be watching what happens here very closely in the weeks ahead.
Guy Henderson, thanks very much indeed. Now, in Spain, thousands of women have taken to the streets across the country to protest against male violence. The demonstrations took place following the discovery of the body of a child. The girl had been allegedly taken by her father without her mother's permission, and her body was found in a suitcase on a seabed. The hunt is now on for the whereabouts of her missing one-year-old sister and their father. Domestic violence is on the rise across Spain, and campaigners say it's becoming worse since the pandemic. Italian police have arrested a man in connection with the deaths of 39 Vietnamese migrants. They died as they were smuggled into the UK in 2019. An international arrest warrant had been issued for the 28-year-old Romanian citizen who allegedly provided the truck used to transport the group. All the migrants were found dead in a refrigerated container on the back of the vehicle in Essex, near London. Still to come here on The World Today. After a slow start, France's vaccination drive is gaining speed with mass vaccination centres and initiatives to reach the country's most vulnerable.
More than 100,000 people in Italy have now died from COVID-19.
The vaccination programme offers some hope for the future, but intensive care units are near capacity.
The Spanish government is hoping to vaccinate over 1 million people by next month.
Living in Germany are struggling with their mental health.
Hungary is supplementing the EU's vaccine rollout, buying doses from Russia and China to speed up the process.
4 million people have tested positive in France.
After a grim winter, the promise of a spring bloom that could mean freedom for millions.
Welcome back. A reminder of our top stories on CGTN. The G7 backs a global infrastructure plan to challenge China's Belt and Road Initiative. And Russia's leader says relations with the US are at their lowest in years, just days before the two presidents are due to meet. So it's mission accomplished. That's the view of China's space agency, which says more than 10 months after the Tianwen-1 probe embarked on its first journey to the Red Planet, it has achieved what it set out to do. CGTN's Sun Yu has more.
It's an official confirmation. China's first Mars mission is a complete success as Tianwen-1 completes orbiting, landing, and roving in one single mission.
In the history of aerospace development, we've made a mark with this 3-in-1 mission of orbiting, landing, and roving in one go. This means China has become a first-tier country in terms of interplanetary exploration.
The Chinese Mars mission started only less than a decade ago, and exploring the red planet is notoriously difficult, with about half of all attempts to make it to Mars failing, and a smooth touchdown is considered even more elusive. The mission's chief designer says part of the reason behind the difficult 3-in-1 approach to Mars is that China is already eyeing even more far-reaching goals.
This first Mars mission signals a new beginning in our interplanetary exploration. We promise to not slow down. Mars exploration, including the retrieval of samples, will remain our focus. We are also planning to explore Jupiter, which is even less known.
Scientists and space administration staff are all effusive over the success, and they promised yet again that cooperation and partnership with international parties will continue in the future Mars exploration and other foray into the deep space. Sun Ye, CGTN, Beijing.
Well, let's take a look now at some of the other news from around the world. Police in Nigeria have fired tear gas and detained several people during anti-government protests on what's known as Democracy Day. It marks the country's move to civilian rule more than 20 years ago. Demonstrators in Lagos and Abuja say they want greater action to combat the country's worsening security situation and have called on President Buhari to step down. Saudi Arabia has restricted the annual Hajj pilgrimage to its own citizens and residents for the second year running. In response to the pandemic, it's only allowing people aged between 18 and 65 who've been vaccinated to take part. It's also set a maximum of 60,000 participants. Before the pandemic, some 2.5 million pilgrims used to visit Islam's holiest sites from around the world. And the US Food and Drugs Agency has asked pharmaceutical giant Johnson & Johnson to scrap 60 million doses of the coronavirus vaccine after fears that they could have been contaminated. The vaccines were made by Emergent Biosolutions at its Baltimore facility. Officials accuse the plant of not following proper manufacturing guidelines, leading to the possible contamination of the vaccinations. Now, France's vaccination campaign will be open to children aged 12 and over from the 15th of June as the country continues a major COVID-19 vaccine rollout. After a slow start, the vaccine programme has been accelerating with the use of drive-through injections and mass vaccination centres, as well as innovative measures to reach the most vulnerable people in the French population. Ross Cullen reports.
France's vaccination drive is in full swing as the government tries to hit its target of 30 million first doses by mid-June. Here in the eastern Paris suburbs, the local authority is trying to get COVID-19 shots to everyone who wants them. This mobile doctor service heads out every day to take the vaccine to people who cannot easily get to a pharmacy or a vaccination centre for a jab.
As soon as vaccines were available, I registered with many hospitals around here. I've been retired for 6 months, but going back to work to vaccinate people is very nice. We feel like we are finally fighting back against this virus.
Out on his vaccine rounds today, Dr. Delahaus is off to several different households. Mrs. Decker is 101, and she is exactly the kind of person for whom this mobile service is vital.
Firstly, I want to protect myself from the virus and also to protect my grandchildren who live here with me.
Having a home visit from a family doctor can also reassure nervous residents.
I was afraid to get vaccinated at first because of how sick I felt after my flu shot, but getting a vaccine is our only way to get through it. I want to be able to get to the grocery store again and see my family.
This vaccination centre has two options for people in the town. They can come here to get vaccinated, or the vaccine can come to them with the mobile doctor. This was how the vaccination centre in Lachancy looked in February this year. Ready to go, but no doses and no patients. It stayed that way for another 2 months after its vaccine quota was diverted. Now it's open and running like centres up and down the country. The mayor has added the option of the mobile doctor, something not many other towns have done so far in France.
C'est plus une question de volonté politique.
I think more than being a question of political will, it's a question of the resources. It's a true logistical difficulty. When you have 300 people to vaccinate at home, people who are elderly, who might not understand what we say, who forget appointments, all of this requires a lot of people on the phone here and measures to put in place to safeguard these particular residents.
With initiatives like the mobile doctor, the coronavirus vaccination campaign is changing gears as the summer approaches and social restrictions continue to ease. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Le Chancy, Eastern Paris.
Now, China's Dragon Boat Festival is just around the corner. As part of these celebrations, rowers around the country are steadying their hands on the oars and trying to keep their boats afloat and ahead in the traditional Chinese race. CGTN's Nicole Ng catches up now with some first-timers taking part in this annual holiday activity.
It's a risky business and much harder than it looks. Although dragon boat racing has been around for thousands of years, there are many for which it's still something quite new. Eamon Williams, for example, is usually the head of maths at a school in the port city of Tianjin. Today, he's a rower, having decided to finally take the plunge after watching the race for years. We asked what surprised him about the experience.
How quickly your arms get tired. Although it's only 200 metres, which takes about a minute, but after the training and stuff of being on the water for about half an hour at a time and you're going up and down, yeah, your arms get tired pretty quickly.
Then he says there's the challenge of rhythm.
As soon as you fall out of sync with everyone else in the boat, yeah, you slow right down. So, yeah, we've got to concentrate on not necessarily trying to go as fast as we can, but staying in time.
Keeping them in sync is team drummer Jane. Her arms mightn't get as sore as the others, but her job has its own challenges.
The seat that you sit on is quite small, and there's nothing for you to hold on to. And the boat is actually quite rocky. It's much worse than I thought it was going to be. So yeah, the challenge for me is to not fall in the water today, hopefully.
With those goals in mind, the team is feeling optimistic.
I think we're good. We've got a good balance in the boat, so we've worked out the weights, so I think it's going to be balanced, so we should be okay.
I wouldn't say we've been rehearsing really hard. We've been out once for about an hour or so, and we needed to take a break in the middle of that. I kind of have the aim of not to come last, but anything above that's a bonus, really.
Many will be first-timers like Eamon and Jane, but they say even if they don't finish on the podium, they'll be happy for having given it a go.
If we leave dry, we've won.
Nicole Ng, CGTN.
And finally, Britain's Queen Elizabeth is well versed in using a sword to award honours, but she insisted on using a ceremonial blade, a sword, to cut a cake. She appeared to struggle a little bit as well. Her predicament at an event on the sidelines of the G7 meeting, provoking some laughter from the Duchesses of Cornwall and Cambridge, with Camilla eventually lending a hand. The Queen was back in a more familiar setting on Saturday, the grounds of Windsor Castle, where she watched a scaled-back Trooping the Colour in honour of her official birthday. And our top story once again. The G7 backs a global infrastructure plan to challenge China's Belt and Road Initiative as the group pledges to help developing countries rebuild. And that's just about it from The World Today. Thanks for watching. We are available on smart TV apps like Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube and Dailymotion as well. And of course, as ever, at CGTN.com and on the app. That's called the CGTN app. And coming up next here on CGTN, The Agenda from me and the team here in London. Goodbye. See you tomorrow.